Joining me still for the rest of the show is Tom Slater, editor of Spiked Online. Morning.
Morning again.
So much to talk about today, not just Jesse Jackson. I mean, can I ask you, genuinely, Jesse Jackson was a huge figure in the US civil rights movement. Not in the British civil rights movement. We didn't have to have one because we didn't have laws that prevented black people from voting and having equal rights. Not a thing. We didn't import our entire black population as slaves, as the Americans had done at that time. Huge figure, working alongside Martin Luther King. Later, though, became, I mean, frankly, I've got to be honest with you, I'm going to call him what I thought he was. I think a race baiter as part of the Black Lives Matter movement. There's definitely some accusations that were made against him for some anti-Semitic comments. I don't know what was in his heart. I think he's one of those many people who starts believing their own publicity, as many people on many different arguments and things do when they become very big figures and they're constantly, you know, hailed as a hero. But I mean, but why do you think that on a day, okay, I know this news on the local elections was announced yesterday, but it has huge implications for millions of people. Big question marks at any normal time about whether or not the local government secretary, the Prime Minister, government lawyers who said it was originally illegal should have to resign over the extra £63 million cost to taxpayers. No small sum of money to us when times is hard. Whether they should resign or not over this. And they're talking about a bloke in the United States.
It's puzzling, isn't it? I think that there's large sections of the media that do kind of already consider us to be kind of the 51st state. They can certainly carry on like that. They think that we're just downstream from American culture, downstream from American politics. And of course that's true up to a degree.
Well, they tried to import that with Black Lives Matters.
And it just doesn't work.
Like our police are going around just randomly shooting black men, apparently, because they're not.
I have genuinely been surprised that we've been sat here and our colleagues at rival broadcasters have continued to cover this story, not least because, you know, Jesse Jackson, as you say, is a quite flawed figure in many respects. So it's not as in quite the same term, shall we say, as if a more uncontroversial figure from the American civil rights movement had passed on, or someone of an even larger stature. But
I mean, it's worth talking about,
of course.
But I mean, I mean, certainly since I've been in the studio, 1 hour and 8 minutes so far on Sky, and I would say 45, 50 minutes on BBC out of the last hour and a bit.
It just doesn't make any sense. And also, as I say, I don't think this comes from a perspective of deep knowledge and wish to impart that about the US civil rights movement. I think people just have got such warped priorities about what people are interested in. Yep. And also, I think often kind of sneering about the grubby business of domestic politics. Like, who cares about local elections, really? Who cares about what's going on with Keir Starmer or Reform and their announcements or what have you? Isn't this so much more glamorous and exciting because it's American? I think there's a lot of that.
I think you're right. There is a lot of that. Well, look, let's talk about this. Let's talk about the stuff they're sneering about, because we do care about this. And I'm sorry, I really do think that voting, I don't care whether it's the local elections, if we got to vote for the local dog catcher, I'd be voting. As far as I can remember, I have never missed a vote anywhere, postal ballot, nearly always, because I used to be a journalist, you know, sent out and about and you wouldn't know whether you were going to be at home for the elections. I consider voting in all elections very important. You can't moan about your bins, you can't moan about, you know, the local pothole mending and things if you haven't voted. You know, and I don't often get the government I want or the local government I want, and they don't often do the things they say they'll do. My local council absolutely promised we'd have weekly bin collections. They did literally 2 weeks later, went fortnightly. You know, and I think they should be punished for that until the day, you know, the day they're gone. But the Prime Minister, 2 hours after saying that he weren't going to be any more U-turns on Radio 2 yesterday, I mean, you've got to laugh. 14th, 15th, 16th, whichever, another U-turn, humiliating. But this was a decision to cancel local elections. The Electoral Commission chair opposed it. The idea was that basically having all these councils that are rearranging, and so basically you'd be voting, and then a year later you'd be voting again. But actually, this reorganising of local councils is taking a lot longer because the people who run local councils are utterly useless at what they do. But the rearranging of the desks, basically, and the cost and the effort, and they simply couldn't manage doing all of that at the same time, was the reason why. But they used a law that was very clearly about basically emergency situations, absolutely huge situations, like being at war, you can postpone elections, as we did in the Second World War. During a pandemic, in 2020, elections were basically cancelled. I mean, they don't say postponed, they were cancelled in 2020. And they tried to do it again in 2021. I know people like Spiked were speaking up about it. I found some old tweets of mine speaking up about it. And basically people went, you're not getting away with it, matey. And they went ahead pretty much everywhere. But to claim that the rearranging of the desk is a justification of this is insulting.
No, it is insulting, and it reveals just how little care they have for democracy. I think you made the point earlier in the show that they thought, oh, no one would really care, or this doesn't really matter, or local elections, the turnout's low, who will even notice? Everyone noticed, because people really care about their vote at a time when they feel like it's being taken away from them. Didn't Brexit certainly tell us that? And I think it's hilarious that you have Keir Starmer effectively U-turning on his no U-turns announcement just the other day. There's some debate as to whether we're not on the 14th or the 15th. He seems to have more U-turns than a dyspraxic on his first driving lesson. It's fascinating how he's gone about with this. But isn't this what happens when you don't really believe in very much and you're quite inept? I suppose it's the combination of those two things. Keir Starmer doesn't really have much politics to him behind it, but besides a few kind of niche things he's quite into, international law and so on. Beyond that, he's blown this way by Morgan McSweeney for a while. He's been blown this way by
last person who speaks
Sue
to him.
Gray for a while.
No backbone, no ideology, no heart, no soul, no nothing.
He reads out a speech, he then takes offence to it into form of the
That's the Island of Strangers speech,
And then combined with that at the same time, both himself, the cabinet, obviously the top civil servants, the person he's just sacked, Chris Wormald, is notorious for being a kind of plodding old duffer in Whitehall. They're all really inept. So you've got no plan and you've got no people who can actually implement it. And here we are.
Here we are. Well, look, let's talk about someone who says he does have a plan. Reform UK leader Nigel Farage is speaking at a press conference in Westminster, announcing who's going to be basically in his cabinet if he does win the next election, announcing a senior team. Let's go live to Nigel Farage in Westminster.
Somebody at the top of this department who's done well himself in the real world. So please welcome to the stage our head of BTE, Richard Tice.
Everybody, and thank you, Nigel, indeed. I just want you to imagine an economy that's growing at 2.5 to 3.5, sometimes 4%, year in, year out. That's what we had in the 80s and 90s. But sadly, anybody under the age of about 40 to 45 doesn't know what that feels like. That's where we've got to get back to. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why we need a new super department covering business, trade, energy, including housing, with a total focus on growth and prosperity. And it makes complete sense that such a department is led by someone with a successful track record in business, who's made hundreds of millions for shareholders, investors, and lenders alike, and who brings together a team of successful business people in order to ensure that we create the right conditions to achieve those sort of levels of growth. For example, people who understand what it is to have smart and safe regulations, but to get rid of what I call the daft, the dither and delaying regulations. Someone who understands that to be a rich nation, you have to have cheap energy, as we had in the 1980s.
Well, that's Richard Tice speaking, just as you heard. He's going to be Deputy Prime Minister in the event of a reform government to Nigel Farage. I'm going to guess Nigel Farage. I didn't know at the beginning. Going out on a limb, Nigel Farage is going to be the PM if he does win. Business, Trade and Energy Department, and also adding in housing. That's a big department, Tom Slater. I mean, you know, you would expect that the man who basically led the party in the interim when Nigel Farage had left to go into sort of media and broadcasting, that he would get a big department. But he's certainly a businessman himself. But business, trade, energy, we know he's been absolutely at the forefront of the anti-net zero madness, but also bringing housing into that, because that is about business and energy costs as well. That's sort of bigger than the departments that Angela Rayner had as deputy PM and John Prescott had when he was deputy PM.
No, exactly, especially because the received wisdom in Whitehall is often that departments are too bloated, too big. There's too many different things that a cabinet member might have to keep an eye on, and therefore that can become a real problem. So I do wonder how much part of this is the fact that, given the fact that they've got a limited number of MPs, given the fact that there's
lots to add a bit in,
and that maybe this sort of merging of various responsibilities might look a little bit different come the end of another election. But no, it's interesting that those things are being put together, and also this is clearly a recognition of the fact that now that there have been more people kind of coming into reform of kind of higher political profile, the prospects of Richard Tice being a sort of shadow chancellor seemed a bit slighted. This is obviously recognition of the fact that he has put in a lot of work in this brief for reform, and that is being particularly recognised.
I'm thinking, I mean, realistically, I mean, we'll come back in as we get the next announcements, but I don't think we'll take the whole thing live because I'd rather we had our discussions rather than put out party political broadcast.
Quite, yeah.
But I mean, the expectation is that Robert Jenrick would be their chancellor in the event of winning. Again, not technically speaking shadow chancellor, you know, being Treasury spokesman. Only the official opposition gets the official shadow title. It doesn't really stop the Lib Dems and others using those titles, though, does it? But I mean, but again, there was a lot of talk, wasn't there, when Kemi Badenoch suddenly announced that Jenrick had been sacked and that he was obviously in talks. And let's face it, I mean, he talks a good game, but he absolutely wasn't ready to go. Talks hadn't been finalised, and he absolutely lost his negotiating position with Nigel Farage that moment, didn't he? When he was already out of the Tories. But whether or not, you know, he would get a big role on that. But I know that from speaking to people in the Reform Party, they have been very impressed with, you know, Jenrick's sort of performances on social media, you know, the videos on X, on TikTok and the like. You know, that's a big issue. Nigel Farage just announcing the next role. Let's go back to Nigel Farage live in Westminster about who would be in his cabinet.
We should make a nice change, but taking on the very responsible and important role of Shadow Chancellor is Robert Jenrick.
So that's the announcement. As we were just talking about, we expect Robert Jenrick only moved from the Tories in the last couple of weeks to be Shadow Chancellor. Obviously, those negotiations did go well. He had, of course, actually worked in the Treasury at one point in his junior ministerial role. Let's go live to what Robert Jenrick is saying.
I didn't keep you waiting this time. Look, we all know that our economy isn't working. And why is that? Well, we've had decades of mismanagement. But this Labour government is in a league of its own. Its record is tantamount to vandalism. It promised stability. It's delivered chaos. It promised to lower bills, but they've kept on rising over and over again. Why? Well, in part because of its crazy energy policies. They said that they wouldn't increase taxes. Well, they've increased taxes over and over again. £60 billion of tax rises to fund their waste. And because they haven't got the courage to tackle our ballooning welfare bill. Businesses are fighting for survival right now. Factories are closing. Investors are leaving the country, and people are suffering. Everyone in the country feels hard up right now. People are working all hours, and then they get to the weekend, and they've got nothing left. The normal expectations of life, they feel like luxuries right now.
Right, well, we'll leave Robert Jenrick to his... again, these are political broadcast some purposes, aren't they, Tom Slater? And that's not a surprise that Robert Jenrick would be in that role. As a good communicator, he was somebody who the Tories, you know, I mean, you know, it was a much narrower second place for him against Kemi Badenoch when he ran for the leadership. Was seen as somebody that if things were not starting to look up for Kemi Badenoch as Tory leader, that he would be sitting there ready to go after the local elections, where no one is expecting to be good news for Kemi Badenoch. I mean, the story will certainly be bad news for Keir Starmer, the Labour Party, but there's unlikely to be much good news for Kemi Badenoch. I mean, a lot of these councils where, you know, they were not going to be cancelled for their elections, and some where they were going to be cancelled where Tories were going to be set on. Again, we don't know how people vote today, but according to the polls, would lose their seats.
No, it's going to be disastrous for them, and I think whilst them being more disastrous or more immediately obviously disastrous for the Southern government, it's something going to be a clear subplot there. And this is another reminder of how much authority she's lost. Someone who was so core to her team, although in a slightly more junior role, having defected and now being on stage with the presumptive biggest party at the next parliament.
Absolutely.
So very significant.
We're going to take a very quick break now.